the work of cultural reclamation when it comes to like Arab Jewish music, writing, cultural production, what it does is that it deconstructs the Arab Jewish binary, which is the foundational assumption of Zionism.
Welcome to JVP Radio, a podcast made by members of Jewish Voice for Peace, the world's largest Jewish organization standing in solidarity with Palestine. My name is Rosa, and I'm a writer, artist, and journalist from a mixed Sephardi and Ashkenazi background, speaking to you from Brooklyn, New York, also known as Lenape-Hoking.
My name is Noemi Hakim Sarfati. I'm a filmmaker of Moroccan and Syrian Lebanese descent, and I'm speaking to you from Oakland, California, unceded Ohlone land.
Today, we will be speaking about Sephardi, Mizrahi, and Arab Jews, more recently gathered under the acronym SWANA. That stands for Jews from Southwest Asia and North Africa.
So we've been focusing on the theme of return. In part one, we talked about the implications of physically returning to our lands of origin. We interviewed Camille Lévy-Sarfati on her experience of returning to Tunisia, where her family is from, and Livnat Konopny-Deklev on her work on political imagination and its close relationship to return for us Mizrahim. Today, we're so lucky to have with us Shirley Bahar and Laura El-Keslassi to discuss the centrality of cultural return for our work towards Palestinian freedom and our collective liberation. Shirley and Laura are both leaders in a very special network built by JVP called the Baqashot Network. Baqashot stands for Black, Indigenous, Jews of Color, Sephardi, and Mizrahi Jews. And this is who the network is built for. Besides providing resources and affinity spaces, the network supports the intentional development of Baqashot leaders across all of JVP formations. And today, among other things, we'll have a chance to see the role that it played in U.S. Mizrahi organizing. So Shirley, I would like to start with you. First of all, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Shirley is a scholar, writer, and organizer. As a cultural organizer, Shirley has been curating numerous art shows, public programs, film series, and community events in New York City and across the U.S. since 2013. And as a writer, she has published her first book, Documentary Cinema in Israel-Palestine, Performance, the Body, the Home, in July 2021. Shirley is currently writing a second book about practices of returning in global Middle Eastern and North African popular culture, which is actually the inspiration for the theme of this episode. Shirley, what led you to wanting to write this second book?
With me visiting more Istanbul, Turkey, where my family and whole 500-year heritage is from, I started thinking about my own cultural, spiritual returns, right, to my own homelands, both music, the language, Turkish soap operas, and also visiting physically Istanbul. And again, the question that I guess the question was already there in the first book of solidarity. How do we return to those resources, cultural, spiritual, and also material, like a physical homeland, while affirming and while staying focused on our commitment to the Palestinian right of return and indigenous right of return in general. This book, hopefully soon, will focus on many of our MENA SWANA Jewish returns, physical, cultural, spiritual, in popular culture, and kind of where I'm reading the potentialities of pushing further our commitment to Palestinian and indigenous right of return and learning from their artwork, from the land back movement, and from leadership and organizing.
I know you more as an organizer, and I know that you've organized and been a mentor to many of us. One of the things that strikes me is that you write like you organize. You do it with a warm and nurturing voice. You really bring us from the margins to the center in the company of other third world feminists. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to that connection between your organizing and your writing.
I was a PhD student at NYU doing work, with the Hebrew and Judaic Studies department, Middle Eastern Islamic Studies, writing about these amazing documentaries, just feeling like we should all be watching them together. Like something about writing felt isolating, and I was starting to question whether writing should feel this isolating, this alone, like just me and the library. So I started this thing I called the Mizrahi film series around 2013, and already kind of, I will say, from queer community and Jewish, Middle Eastern, immigrant, queer community. I found my way to JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace protests, actions, as well as Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, JFREJ, and started connecting more and more with these people. And then when I started the Mizrahi film series, at the same time, we had a Femme and Friends knitting circle. And I think I did a little rant about how I never meet any other Mizrahi Jews, and all the Jews here are Ashkenazi. And this other person said, me too, I'm also Mizrahi. And that person was Keren Sofer Sharon. And that person started the Mizrahi caucus at JFREJ. And so I found that to a large degree, I have so many more interested people who are interested in what I'm doing and what I'm saying in organizing spaces than in academia, honestly. Like, I found a camaraderie, I found community, I found these were the people who came to the film series, these were the people who wanted to hang out. When the dissertation kind of became more of a book, kind of on that journey, I really started writing very directly about the question of solidarity, because I was already in an organizing space. The question of why does academia try to make us not be organizer, right? Like, why in academia, whenever people say to me, you're an activist, it's a dirty, it's negative, right? Why are we supposed to keep those compartmentalized when it's very clear that Mizrahi studies, like queer studies, like family studies, all of these things came from the street. All of these things came from movement.
Thank you, Shirley, for letting us into your story. I will now introduce Laura with an excerpt from her soon-to-be-released album, Yarorbati. This was an extract of Sidi Habibi by Algerian Jewish singer Salim Halali, which was sung by Laura El-Keslassi, whom we have the honor of having with us today. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Laura El-Keslassi is a singer of Judeo-Arab music based in Brooklyn. Her latest project is Yarorbati, Divas in Exile, of which you just heard an excerpt. Through Yarorbati, which means Oh My Exile, Laura unearthed the music and stories of Judeo-Arab divas from mid-century North Africa. She also demands that we contend with the Nakba. As a spiritual leader, Laura has been active in developing egalitarian Sephardi practice in New York, Boston, and Paris for 7 years. Laura, you've spent years now singing us into freedom. What led you to this work?
I grew up in Paris in a rather traditional Moroccan Jewish family, and this type of music was actually very present in my house. My mom would put Arab Andalusi music on the radio for Shabbatot, for holidays. I went to synagogue pretty regularly, particularly after my grandmother died when I was 12, and I was trained without their knowledge by the best Hazzanim of Moroccan heritage in Paris from a very young age. And I think I was just trained by listening because obviously I couldn't, sing publicly in the synagogue.
When you said, obviously I couldn't sing, do you mind making it more explicit? Why?
I was in a traditional synagogue where there is a very clear separation between men and women, and where women are not allowed to lead services or to sing for the congregation. So that was not an option for me. And so I would always, go back after the services at home and do like huge muas with my sisters, meaning like vocal improvisations at home, but they only stayed in the shower basically, for a very long time. When I moved to the US in 2008, I think I spent about 7 years having like a thin access to that culture. And that was very difficult for me. And it was around my wedding, actually, like in 2015, that I really felt the urge around the life cycle event to reconnect with that music, which was very grounding for me. And particularly for my henna, like I wanted to have the song of Zohar al-Fasiyah at my wedding. But at the time, I couldn't put the name on it. I didn't even know how it was called. I just remember that my grandmother would sing it at every henna of like every cousin's wedding that I've ever been to when I was a kid. And so I sort of like looked for it and asked people, and nobody was able to tell me it's Abiyadiana by Zohar al-Fasiyah. Look it up. This is the recording, What I did do is that I reached out to an Andalusi group of music, the New York Andalus Ensemble. And I think 2 months after my wedding, I joined the group and I started singing pretty regularly with that group. We would study Andalusi nubas, which are basically a medieval Arab tradition from Andalusia that then traveled to North Africa after 1492, which is a series of songs and musical suites that are originally written in Arabic, but that have the particularity of having equivalents in Hebrew. So it's a huge repertoire of music that's available in both languages. And it used to be passed down orally in Jewish and Muslim households for centuries in Andalusia, in Morocco, in Algeria. So I started working professionally, basically as a singer, as part of the New York Andalus Ensemble. And then at the same time, I started connecting to JFREJ, to Jews for Racial and Economic Justice. I had met Ira Chon Temple in the Andalus Ensemble, and Ira was embedded in the JFREJ community and basically introduced me to the scene, where I discovered the JFREJ Sephardi Mizrahi caucus, which had been co-founded by Keren, Shirley, Ora, Batashvili, Yasmin Savdieh, and Keren asked me to give a workshop there. I think that was the first workshop I gave of Arab Jewish music. I was really nervous about it. And it went amazingly. It was like incredible. Basically, it really felt like folks needed, there was very strong appetite to like revive that type of music, to bring Arabic back into their mouth. And so that was sort of the beginning of, my introduction into organizing. As Shirley said, this is really like collective work that, many, many organizers, cultural organizers, political organizers, spiritual leaders have been doing for decades here in New York. And one of sort of the mover and shaker was Natalie Chaziza, who was an amazing Mizrahi spiritual leader, among other things. And she had started doing egalitarian services in her house. And there was 30 people there. And she started doing Selichot and led the whole service. And I felt like the ground was, opening under my feet. I was like, oh my God, I can sing Selichot and lead it. So that was the first moment. It was really Natalie that gave me permission for that and empowered me to do it, because she clocked that I knew it really well. So she was like, come to the front and sing it with me, And literally, I think the following year, with the support of Let My People Sing and of Kavod Boston, organizers of Kavod Boston, we organized the first Egalitarian Sephardi Yom Kippur in Boston. And that was really a groundbreaking moment. And from there on, basically, this work has kept growing in New York, on the East Coast, and now, across the country. So that's really, really incredible. So that's sort of the spiritual thread. And then on the artistic level, during the pandemic, I really wanted to sort of approach the musical material that I had familiarized myself with from a feminist perspective. And also I wanted to take heads on the political context of the music, which oftentimes, unfortunately, I find in Hebrew, Arabic, like cultural production, oftentimes is something that's put under the rug because it's so painful and explosive. And I really wanted to address it heads on. And I think I was also like personally trying to understand the geopolitical and the sociological forces of the last century that had impacted my family and more largely communities from the Maghreb. So that's when I started to research three figures. I wanted to have a figure from Morocco, a figure from Tunisia, and from Algeria. And I dove into the story of Zohar al-Fatia, of Habiba Msika, and of Lynn Monty of Algeria. And from there, I started to really understand how the forces of French colonialism, political Zionism, and patriarchy had shaped their lives, and with them, the lives of my grandparents. So that's how Yarorbeti started. And then I was still collaborating with Ira Temple, and during the pandemic, basically we spent hours and hours in my garden in Brooklyn, freezing, uncovering and unearthing the music and talking about the sociological, the political, the educational meaning of the work. I mean, it was one of the most productive time of my life, even though it was a very scary time. It was also like a very generative time in the conversations I had with Ira. And when New York reopened in June 21, we presented the concert for the first time in the streets of Brooklyn. And I'm super happy to say that this year we recorded the studio album of Yarorbeti, which is coming out this next year on online and on vinyl. So I can't wait to share it with all of you and to continue and deepen those conversations.
Thank you, Laura. I'm learning so much. And I also get the impression that you two meeting each other had long-lasting consequences on each other's work, as well as for the communities that you belong to. Could you discuss the way that this encounter has been transformative?
So Shirley came up to me after this first concert, basically, and was like, I want to support your work in any way possible. And that was like really touching for me. And I think what was amazing is that Shirley understood from the get-go the critical importance of Arab Jewish cultural reclamation work. You know, it was a blessing to work with Shirley because she understood that the work of cultural reclamation, when it comes to like Arab Jewish music, writing, cultural production, what it does is that it deconstructs the Arab Jewish binary, which is the foundational assumption of Zionism. And she was an organizer, an amazing one. So I think she wanted to organize me, and she did. We can say that at this point, I think.
Yeah. I'm going to demystify the myth because sometimes people ask me, so how did you organize Laura? And I say I refuse to tell the story because I really don't think that's what happened. I remember us connecting and kind of going into depth of conversation for the first time in a Mimuna of 2021, which was just like very like spontaneous Prospect Park Mimuna that was just like bring your food, bring your music, and us kind of going deep into conversation. This was before I was on staff at JVP. And May 2021 was the moment of the Palestinian Unity Intifada. So we saw a lot of people being like really moved to seeing what is happening in Gaza at the time. And our movement and Jewish solidarity movement grows. And in that time, you doing that concert and then you going in one of the most Zionist synagogues in the city. And I was just like, it's amazing you're here. And I didn't even expect anything. And I remember that moment that you spoke about the Palestinian right of return in that synagogue. And I was like, damn, what a badass. This is it. Like from now on, I'm committed to supporting you, whatever. But then when I joined the staff, I was like, this is the thing we need to do. This is very obvious.
Then we organized the first Mimuna at World Birth with the JVP by Jackson Network, the Gal Keila, and that was really a huge turning point because it really felt at the time that we were manifesting a post-Zionist reality. And I think it gave people like a huge gulp of hope at that time.
I do want to make it explicit that Mimuna is a traditional end of Passover party that was celebrated in Morocco. So traditionally, Jews would leave their flour at their Muslim neighbor because they weren't allowed to eat flour during Passover. And at the end of Passover, they would retrieve the flour and invite all of their neighbors to a beautiful celebration of Mimuna that has become, in a way, a symbol of Jewish-Muslim friendship and solidarity.
And I remember that moment in Wild Birds, and I remember being, I think, honestly, either in a SWANA non-Jewish majority audience or about half and half, but something that was really like, it felt like, okay, this is a lot of Arab non-Jews around us, and every single person knows the lyrics of the song.
Yeah.
And I remember that moment where I just felt like such a heart connection, because I was standing in the middle of the stage and Laura had this thing between the songs. I think I actually have the recording. She would look at me and have this giggle of like, what the fuck? Are you like noticing we're making history? This is history. Like, what's going on? And I remember that moment, like, was just like, our destinies are bound. We are part of this community, and we're just interconnected in the Arab diaspora.
I think it's fair to say that basically Shirley scaled the Egalitarian from small intimate gatherings to 300 people gatherings. And then I think, when Shirley became the head of the Baqashot network at JVP, I mean, it's really a feat that you've been able to organize on a national level so many folks who have come to anti-Zionist activism through the Sephardi Mizrahi caucus. That has massively contributed to the movement on a national level. So we've been basically working hand in hand, over the years, through those different communities. And then that sparked other networks like the Global Mizrahi Left, which connected people internationally, following October 7th. Yeah, I mean, Shirley has done an unbelievable work in connecting people, both on a local level, on a national level, and on an international level. So really, I have huge admiration for the work that you're doing, because it's so difficult and you're so amazing at it. Thank you for all the organizing work you've been doing.
What was it about the circumstances here in New York or in this community that has kind of allowed this to coalesce over the past decade?
For me, it really started from a very basic fight for equality, equal rights for all genders, all sexual orientation, fighting all forms of discrimination. When I first connected to the JFREJ Sephardi Mizrahi Caucus, it was a very feminist space. It was a very queer space. And that's where I first felt the power of collective feminist organizing. And I feel a lot of people had experienced a lot of exclusion on different level, and that people were fighting for something as simple as equal rights. So that's the first thing. Then the second thing is that as we organized as Arab Jews, as SWANA Jews, and we dove deeper and deeper in the history of our families, because people are, second generation, third generation of immigration from Arab lands, sometimes first to third generation of Mizrahi descent. So there is a sense that we are reaching now a point where the generations that had a direct access to the lands where they came from, that were born in the lands, these generations are started to disappear. And so with that, there's a very strong sense of loss. And I think that collectively people started to realize that we are experiencing one of the most seismic, period in Sephardi history. I think it's on par with the 1492 expulsion from Spain, which is that there's a whole world that is disappearing right in front of our eyes. And we are the first witnesses to that, And I think the younger generations, particularly on the left, are very aware of that. And so many of us, I think at the same time in the last, I would say, 15 years basically, have started like looking back at the history of their family, and many have come to the conclusion that Zionism has been a force of, as Ella Shochat puts it, of dislocation, right? Dislocation first of Palestinians, of course, and we're now witnessing the most horrific period of ethnic cleansing in Palestine since 1948. And of dislocation of Arab Jews, meaning dislocation from place, dislocation from identity, from the sense of self, dislocation from language, the sense that we are hors sol en français, like we are, outside of the ground, basically.
We're not only witnessing the disappearance and displacement, dislocation, but also at the same time, and because of that, I think we are witnessing a growing movement of SWANA Jews, non and anti-Zionist people who are really asking themselves, why did this happen? And then realizing that actually, I'm gonna say things have not disappeared. There is a great attempt to disappear them. There's a great attempt to eliminate and remove and put Arab and SWANA Jewish histories in the past, box them in an archive. We are saying, actually, not that long of a time has passed. We have access to these languages. We can relearn them. And that's what I mean by return. We're returning to the things to protect them, to practice how we can continue nourishing them so that they live on from the past to the future, so that we can see a sense of continuity for our lives to live on. I remember 10 years ago, and Laura, you remember that too, I'm sure, Noemi. It was so compartmentalized that in organizing spaces, you needed to go one place to seek Mizrahi culture, and you needed to go another place to seek Palestinian solidarity. And a lot of it, I'm going to give credit to us and the hundreds of people that we're organizing with. To think that we are hundreds when we used to be a living room is already mind-blowing, and globally, right?
I think it's so interesting the way you tell the story that people in the community came to Palestine solidarity through feminism and queer liberation in a way. And, the realization of their Arab Jewish identity maybe was not completely unrelated to queerness as well, and the non-binary thinking.
Yeah, because it's a work of like reintegration. To me, it's like healing work in the sense that it fights against separations of the self and dissonance. So in a way, it allows us to stay sane, And I think that that's a very queer experience, and it's also like an Arab Jewish experience.
Totally. This like staying sane is exactly what it is. You know that at some point you can become so depressed and so paralyzed from the news that either you're going to just stay in bed or you're going to get up, you're going to have to do something, whatever action. I think that's key. I want to say also, queer, trans, feminist people, we're always the ones who fuck shit up. We're always at the avant-garde. That's always true for every movement. And the other thing I will say that kind of came up when Laura and I were talking was that sense that maybe for queer and trans people, it could be a little easier or more organic to move away from Zionism too, if they were raised in Zionism, because there's already so much distance and sometimes alienation, sometimes complete removal from family, and so much emphasis on chosen family that maybe sometimes it's actually easier than for people who are in more of a heteronormative or straight structure, where the biggest loss if you grow up in Zionism and you're moving away from Zionism, the biggest loss is or could be your family, your people that you love, otherwise love, that raised you.
Yeah, I think what Shirley is saying, we were having these conversations with Ira Temple for a very long time, and he said something that's like that I find very true, that I think I can say here, is ultimately the connection to Zionism boils down to family bonds, and that's why it's so hard to undo and disentangle, is because it's so correlated to family and to love coming from the family. And that's how the state sort of like, works inside the bodies of people. It's like it sort of enters the bodies and minds of people through family, through generations. And that's the most difficult thing to do. And maybe, I'm not sure that people from the outside like fully realize that like there is something that's like very, very difficult to undo, because it's so intrinsically linked to family.
It really relates to like the organizing that you've been doing as building a chosen family for people to land on, when they start owning their convictions. And that brings me to a question I had for you, Shirley, which is that the first time I met you, you told me something that stuck with me, which is that it is my deepest belief that for Mizrahim, organizing for Palestine and our collective liberation will be through cultural reclamation. Why did you have that at that time, that conviction that cultural organizing is crucial in the context of Mizrahi solidarity with Palestine?
So I don't know if I agree with myself anymore. I remember our first conversation very fondly. It was the spring of 2023. And I think I was coming from a place where I was thinking about the idea of cultural and spiritual return, and like the co-optation, right, that's happening in Zionist spaces, and how we need to focus on like pushing back against that co-optation, and really make sure that when we are relearning shared cultural resources, Arab interfaith language and culture, and Middle Eastern in general, that we stay focused on a vision of return and liberation and justice for all, because co-optation is happening all the time, where we have a struggle and we have a history, and some Zionist institution just takes it completely, depoliticizes it, and puts it out there as this like, look at us, we're diverse, look at us, we're progressive, except for Palestine. So we need to do cultural reclamation, and then we need to say this shared culture that we have is how we connect and how we reinforce our commitment. If we're part of a shared culture, maybe even shared ethnicity, community, that means we have to strengthen our solidarity and commitment. After October 2023, we hit the ground running, action after action for ceasefire. And I think, like many people, I started feeling the urgency. Now is the time to act. And it doesn't mean that cultural reclamation is not important anymore.
For me, it was a guiding principle at the beginning, what you had said to me, because I felt like through cultural reclamation, we can bring more people in, basically. It's through this medium that people are going to be moved towards Palestine solidarity.
Yeah, I think there's also a question of time frame, meaning that I think reclamation work is like really long-term work, and it's like a deep work. And then there's work that needs to happen now in the urgency of genocide. That I think that in a way, the reclamation work that we had been laying out for like a decade basically allowed us to show up pretty much right away after October 7th in protests, etc. So there was no hesitation to join the protests. There was no hesitation to join the movement for a ceasefire, to fight against genocide. These types of works can coexist, but they work on like different like timeline. I mean, of course, the work of Palestinian liberation is a very long-term project. But the urgency of genocide did require us to show up right away, to show up powerfully, and to try to contribute to changing the narrative and changing the situation on the ground, even though it's been like very difficult, if not impossible work.
So Laura, we're recording this during the summer of 2025. I'm wondering if you might place this conversation that we're having today in historical context of what's going on right now, specifically in Gaza.
Yeah, so we are witnessing the ethnic cleansing of Gaza as we speak, which is the continuation of the ethnic cleansing and displacement that we witnessed during the Nakba in 1948, the first mass ethnic cleansing of Palestine. For all of us, it's truly unbearable to witness the mass starvation of Gazans as we speak, the atrocity of the mass killings, the maiming, the torturing of children, of women, of men in Gaza. I mean, every day is bringing more and more and more atrocities. They announced that they would raise Gaza on day one, and they have. Mm-hmm. Everything is destroyed. Homes, hospitals, mosques, cemeteries, heritage sites, schools, everything. They've killed more than 60,000 people, probably way more than that. Now they're pushing people in concentration camps on 12% of the territory, basically to starve to death. So it's textbook genocide. It's absolutely enraging to witness how this country, the US, is basically enabling genocide for the sake of its own interest in the region. You know, it's way more than complicity. It's that Israel is acting as the mercenary of the U.S. in the Middle East. So it's really an alliance of death is what we're witnessing. And the genocide will have unimaginable impact on the lives, on the material and spiritual reality of Palestinians for generations to come. And Israelis will have to grapple with this moral stains for centuries to come. I'm extremely pessimistic about the future, to be honest. You know, you asked me about my vision, and, you know, for the last 2 years, we've been glued to the present because how horrific the present is. The only way that we can herald, you know, a time where justice will prevail is that we need to continue and sustain the fight to end apartheid, to end legalized racism, to end the colonial borders, to end the checkpoints, to end military subjugation, to end domination, to end the mass killing, to end the forced normalization with Arab countries in the region, and really put ourselves like in between those forces and the erasure of an entire people. And I think, you know, sometimes I think about this project, this problem, and I think, how difficult is it to imagine a democratic state where all its inhabitants are equally protected under law? How difficult is that to imagine? You know, there's got to be like a very colonial and orientalist mind in the West to think that that's an impossible paradigm for the Holy Land. It's completely insane. And these are basically the conditions that the West takes completely for granted for themselves. And these are the political conditions that would allow for return, for justice, for movement, for fluidity, and ultimately, over time, peace, inshallah. So that no one may be a stranger in their ancestral land. That's the vision.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. On a related topic, I would like to play an excerpt from the show that you performed in Brooklyn in May 2021, Yaror Bati.
So as we honor World Refugee Day today, I cannot avoid to say that as an Israeli, I think that Israel should contend with the Nakba. The displacement of 700,000 Palestinians from their homeland. Refugees have a right not only to protection and dignity and freedom and equality, but also the right of return. May all refugees access freedom, dignity, and the right of return.
Laura, you call your album Retrofuturist, and it does deal with returning forward. And I'm curious, I'm particularly interested in the way that you tie Mizrahi return with Palestinian right of return.
So, I started by saying that, the personal is political. And I think one of the things that happened in the project was that through the unearthing of this music that I did, I also sort of discovered a huge family heritage and lineage that we had in the family that was connected to the tradition of Baqashot. And I sort of discovered that my ancestors were actually instrumental in compiling the tradition of Baqashot in Morocco. And one thing leading to the other, I actually decided as part of the process to reintegrate my full name, Laura Al-Kislassi, because when my dad moved to France, he cut his name in half because of Arab-phobic and anti-Semitic experiences that he had, and so he cut it to Lassi. So I was born under the name Lassi, and through the project, I decided to sort of reintegrate my true name, which became my artist name, Laura Al-Kislassi. And to me, that was a way to sort of reconnected the parts of the self, to ground myself in a geography of the Mediterranean, because it's a Sephardi name, it's a Moroccan name. And I think it was also a way for me to unearth the name. And as I was doing that, it became very clear to me that the erasures of names were very destructive. And I sort of looked back into the difficulty in Zionist spaces to even utter the name of Palestine. The name itself of Palestine is a threat, right? Because it's been so erased, it's really the mechanism of taboo, where you can't touch on the name because there's something explosive under the name. And what's explosive under the name is basically a foundational crime. You can't touch the name, but once you start opening the name, all of a sudden this huge history that comes out. I started digging, and I even looked at, the town that my family arrived in the 60s in Israel, Palestine, which was a Moroccan yishuv, like a Moroccan town, the town of Ashdod, where many Moroccans landed. And it's only after years and years and years of going there pretty regularly, that I discovered that the real name of Ashdod is Isdud. That's the Arabic name, because it was a Palestinian village of 4,000 people that was basically completely erased. All the Palestinians of the village were displaced to Gaza during the 1948 Nakba. By basically starting to uncover Mizrahi history, it was directly tied to me to the history of erasure and displacement of Palestinians. As I dig deeper and deeper into the history, I really became enraged at the proposition that not only Zionists, but also basically the West has been proposing since 48, which is a proposition of exchange of population. That's what it is, right? The proposition is, you know what? And at this point, they don't even hide it anymore. They said, you know what? The Nakba did exist. Israel did expel 800,000 Palestinians in 1948. But you know what? There was also 800,000 to 1 million people who were displaced from the Arab world. So we're basically exchanging Mizrahim for Palestinians, which is a horrific proposition when you think of what it means for the bodies, minds, spirits, history, societies of Palestinians and of Arab Jews across the region and Jews in Muslim lands across the region. So that's the proposition, you know. I think that like our work as like activists and as cultural makers offer a radically alternative vision, which is one that would enact the right of return of Palestinians first, and one that would also, over the long term, allow for the return of Jews from the Muslim world into their ancestral lands. To me, these are, you know, very tied, and that's also one of the reasons why the problem is so like you know, intrinsically blocked, is because the Israeli government is basically acting and co-opting that history, co-opting that pain by basically telling Arab Jews, oh, you know what? Now you have the right to be Arabs, do your mimunas, do like cultural revivals, etc. We love that you're Arabs, but don't do it with Arabs. That's like the simplification of it, but that's basically it. Only Arabs who are willing to normalize, right? Only people, only governments that put a blind eye on ethnic cleansing and genocide. That proposition is like completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
It's unacceptable. And so, I mean, you know, Shirley has said it very clearly. I think, you know, Palestinian organizers have been saying this basically since 1948. The rights of Palestinians to return is fundamental for justice to prevail in Israel-Palestine. That it's as simple as that.
And I mean, in what you're saying, I'm also hearing how intensely we've been pit against each other as Arab Jews against Palestinians. And there would be a whole other conversation around this. But I want to ask a last question, Laura, since we're lucky to have you here for a few more minutes. From all of what you've just said, it's clear to me, and from all of the work that you've done, that you return to tradition by breathing life into it and by centering it around Jewish ethics and values that are relevant to our lives today. And this, to me, is the essence of what it means to keep a tradition alive. And in that vein, I want to ask you, what is the vision of the future that you're leading us to return to?
It's a potential reality after Zionism. One where Palestinians have the right to self-determination. One where Palestinians have the right to return. One where Palestine is free from the river to the sea. One where reparations, justice prevails. One where Muslim, Jews, and Christians live in justice and peace from the river to the sea. One where Arab Jews have the possibility to return to their ancestral land. One where imperial forces will lay off their hands from the region and let the people of the Mediterranean self-govern for their own interest. One where we may see a federation of the Mediterranean for cooperation, for prosperity. One where borders will vanish and music will reign.
Thank you so much, Laura and Shirley. To our listeners, stay tuned for the upcoming publication of Shirley Bahar's book on practices of return in global Middle Eastern and North African popular culture, as well as Laura's album, Ya Ghorbati, coming out very soon. In the meantime, we will link to Laura's performance of Yagorbati in 2021 in the show notes.
If you are Mizrahi, Jewish from Southwest Asia and North Africa, and this episode has moved you, or if you would like to join our efforts towards collective liberation, or even if you're just curious about learning more, you can reach out to byjoxim-staff@jvp.org, and we will welcome you with open arms. Byjoxim stands for Black, Indigenous Jews of Color, Sephardim, and Mizrahim. We cannot wait to tell you more about the outstanding organizing that takes place within this formation in future episodes.
Thanks to co-producers Rosa Schwarzberg and Feivel Rothberg, as well as Eleanor Weil for the intro music, which is an extract from her cover of Logalerian. We'll end on an extract from Laura Elkeslassi's album, Yagorbati. Until next time.
Until next time.
يا ربي